the thought that it can do something simply gets your psychic processes going in a vicious circle. So then at that moment you are in the contemplative state naturally. You are neither trying to do something about it, you are certainly not trying to do nothing about it, because you find the only thing you can do, now this is interesting, the only thing you can do is let it happen, whatever's going on, let it happen, and you're not even letting. How could you stop it? Because if you try to stop it, that trying to stop is all part of the happening. See? So what have you discovered? When there is absolutely nothing to do except it happens, whatever it does happen, you suddenly discover that you are what happens. That you're not limited to what goes on inside your skull, that the wind blowing outside, the cars pouring down the road, the rattle of human life, the sun shining, and all that. There is no you, there is no reality that is apart from that. Then stay with that a while. Just don't try and get that recognition back as something you had remembered. You had suddenly this flash, this insight of Satori. And then you think, oh, let's hold on to that. I don't want to forget that. Let's make a note of it. See? Ugh. I don't know, you're still trying to pull a trick here. See what happens next. Don't stay with that. Go on. The moment is always new, always fresh, whatever's going on. Don't try to fix it into any mold and say, that state of mind is Satori. See, that I must keep. Don't keep anything. You can't. It's just like pouring water into a bottomless bucket. Let it flow through. Let it go on. And as you go on, you see something is coming to you all the time. You don't know what it is. You don't know what's going to happen next, so you just watch. But don't slide back. You're always right where it's happening, right at the critical moment, which is the moment. And don't worry about whether you're right or whether you're wrong, whether this is what you're supposed to do or not supposed to do. There is no script. Unless you insist on making somebody else's script your script. And you see it coming at you. And yet you realize it's not coming at me from somewhere or someone else. This spontaneous arisal is me. There isn't any me besides this. So when the chickens cluck outside, that's just the same as my having belly rumbles. It's all me, from each one of our points of view. Now then, as you well know, those things in life which are most pleasurable almost invariably happen unexpectedly. They are not contrived. When I take students with me to Japan, nothing, because they see what they're supposed to see. Somebody tells them, when you go to India, you've got to see the Taj Mahal. You must try. Now then, as you well know, those things in life which are most pleasurable almost invariably happen unexpectedly. They are not contrived. When I take students with me to Japan, the first thing I tell them when we sit down together is that this is not going to be a scheduled tour, except within certain rather vague limits. Many people, when traveling in foreign countries, see nothing because they see what they're supposed to see. Somebody tells them, when you go to India, you've got to see the Taj Mahal. You must see the caves at Ajanta. You must see the burning ghats at Benares, and so on. And they all go and see that so that they can say, I've said it. I've seen it. And then they take these little black boxes, which are capturing devices for grabbing experience, and they fascinatedly go around, click, 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 like this, and never see anything. They're always looking at the aperture figuring and see that that's right, and so on. And it's an absolute drag taking a camera, especially if you're not a professional photographer. You know, you just have to preserve this memory of this one thing. Once in a lifetime, I got a chance to see the Taj Mahal. Click. Well, what I say to these people is, look, the Japanese have a phrase which is like our phrase, just follow your nose. They say follow your feet. Because, unlike the United States, Japan is a very easy place to wander in. I mean, here it's very difficult to wander. It takes narrow streets, funny courtyards, curly kind of places for effective wandering. Here, you're not allowed to wander. If you go wandering in any nice part of town, the police will stop you. Because, where are you going? Nowhere particular. Well, that's very suspicious not to be going anywhere particular. Where are you from? Have you got a paper that proves that you were there? Paper always being more reliable than people. So, and everything is straightened out, you know. It's the shortest distance between 2 points. Gazawi, as fast as possible, no wandering allowed. But in Japan, you still can wander. It's a miracle you can still, but you can. And you can take a side turning, not knowing where the faintest idea where you're going, and suddenly you discover the most amazing garden in a courtyard, or a funny little restaurant where the most unusual food is being served, or a bar where there's room only for 2 people to sit, and they're serving broiled sea snails, or a shop where rare pottery is being sold. And although the shopkeeper can't speak a word of English, you go in and the utmost courtesy is shown to you. Brought out tea to drink, and very pleasant, friendly surroundings. You didn't get shown this. You followed your feet and discovered it. Now, all the best things on any journey I've ever taken were unscheduled. And most of the scheduled things were a disappointment because of a big build-up of expectation and then flop. So, therefore, the essential principle of the positive side of the pursuit of pleasure, you see, is the unscheduled life. Now, of course, for the convenience of other people, some schedule is always necessary. But it's best to make it a kind of humdrum habit thing And don't get uptight about it. Because it is nothing more, just as the skeleton is a framework for the flesh, so a schedule is bones for wiggles, snakes on ladders. And we need some bones, you see. Otherwise everything gets too gooey. But don't take your bones too seriously. Always allow for the unexpected. Because this is true at the level of the most simple sensuous pleasures, as well as at the level of high mystical experience. So the paradoxes that come into mystical literature, such as that he that would save his life must lose it, or loose it, or the highest knowledge is non-knowledge, in the Kena Upanishad, where it is explained that Brahman, the Supreme, is known to those who know it not. All that sort of paradox is simply this, you see, that the cosmic consciousness is what arises of itself when you see that nothing arises at all except what arises of itself. In other words, life isn't something on the one hand happening to you on the other, or being done by you on the one hand to it on the other. The whole thing, you and it, is a spontaneous occurrence that is going on. The word spontaneous in Chinese means of itself. Zhiran means in Chinese what is so of itself, and it's their word for nature. And be careful to remember what I said yesterday, that the happening, the spontaneous, is not something you can preconceive, and by preconceiving it, imitate spontaneity by going against social convention. Because then you are merely acting out the obverse of the convention and being conditioned by it as ever. The truly spontaneous can only happen of itself, and you cannot arrange it. So then, you may say, well, now, does that mean, as we say,
what is spontaneous only can be socially valued?
Just take things as they come.
It cannot be valued as a consequence of what somebody's purchasing.
So on.
It can only be valued as the consequence of what some individual is deciding to do, of their own actual voluntary self. And this is why I find in Zen the expression of the totally genuine act to be synonymous with the human value, the life coin value that we carry when we actualize what's actually within.
Well, the ordinary person is anxious and full of plans and schemes, and therefore let's be the opposite of that. Take things as they come. See? That's the same as fake spontaneity. Because this true taking things as they come doesn't mean that you imitate a placid attitude, or that you have some kind of expected behavior, like, say, one expects of a psychotherapist a certain kind of act which he puts on to accommodate you. If you say to a psychotherapist, you know, I have just raped my daughter and murdered my wife, he says, mm-hmm. And, you know, that's an amazingly unhuman reaction. So, also then, you see, people have preconceived notions of a mystic or a Buddha or a sage, and they think he has no emotions. And so when Zen masters, for example, get angry, they get so angry that the room rattles. And but when it's over, it's gone. It's like a child's emotion, you know. A child can flare up and scream, and suddenly, zhup, it's vanished. People think, well, he ought to have more control over himself. Isn't he supposed to have all that yogi self-control and all that no emotion and be completely serene and placid under all circumstances? Rubbish. That would be to say that a stone Buddha is as good as a living one. That isn't to say, we will test your virtue by taking out our stopwatch. We will bang you about and see how long it takes you to scream. If you don't scream at all, then of course you win. But it doesn't make much difference. You might as well be dead. Is that a test of anything? It's simply a test of insensitivity. So, don't think, therefore, that there is some kind of stereotype of what this state is. We don't know what this state is. And those who have tried to write it down and explain it have always said, but it's ineffable. And what I'm trying to describe is I'm doing my best, but I know I can't really get it across. So you would say then, going back to the point that I'm making here, the person who said, well, it's just taking things as they come. And by that you think of something like, you get up and brush your teeth and take a shower and look out of the window, and then you put on your pants and have a boiled egg for breakfast, and then get on the bus and go and do some business and so on. And that's it. But that is not it. Because when you are in the state that I'm talking about, what from the former point of view would have appeared to be nothing more than ordinary everyday life is suddenly seen to be a magical process. Absolutely weird. So that you can see that you might be just rubbing around in some ash. It becomes perfectly obvious that that's the whole point of the universe. Incredible. I mean, it's all there. Infinity in the grain of sand and everything. But that's it. And you look at other people rushing around, when people's noses, when they're in that state of rushing around, are more pointed somehow than they would be otherwise. The nose seems to be leading out, the eyes wildly searching, and people going about their business every day, serious. I'm going to get there, I'm going to make this thing. You think they're quite mad. You feel sorry for them. You don't feel angry at them. But they're quite mad. They don't realize that now is it. That's where it's all going, as well as where it all comes from. The Alpha and the Omega is now. And indeed the angels keep their ancient places, turn but a stone and start a wing. The whole surround of us is completely magical. Now, of course, we become aware that imaginative people are conscious of this. Imaginative people show their consciousness of it by the way they act, by their taste in whatever they surround themselves with, you begin to notice that there are some certain people with whom you either have great accord or great fear because they're not ordinary, because they have an atmosphere of magic. They have imagination. And they're not hiding under an attempt to conform to the ideal of being ordinary. And the artistic people are here. There are also people you can call relaxed people, relaxed society. There's a very wonderful class of people. They're not on edge. You know, there are some people who are edgy all the time, and you feel that your very presence around their place is a mess, if you know what I mean. But relaxed people have what in Arabic is called barakah. It means divine grace, but it also means the quality of an old frying pan that has had long years of use and is just perfect. That's barakah. And there are people like that too, you see. And all these are the great spontaneous virtues that cannot be contrived. See, we can try to produce barakah by finding some scientific process for artificially antiquing things, for putting patina on bronze in 5 minutes, or pre-aging wine, or something like that. I mean, none of it works. It's all phony. Because this thing can only come in the process of growth. So you say, well, do I have to wait?
I'm fading.
But the whole thing is in the waiting. I don't mean the virtue of patience. I mean waiting when there is nothing to do but wait. And when you see there is nothing to do but wait, then it happens. But it won't be hurried. Because the minute you're trying to hurry it, that introduces the one thing that stops it. The miracle, the magic thing is happening all the time. But you can't see it when you're trying to get it. And you can still less see it when you're trying to get it fast.
Bad luck for you, friend.
So there is no alternative but to go through the point of you can't get it at all. You are going to be you. The same slob you've always been. See? You can't change it. And all your good resolutions are just bombast. And then you start to be real. So just as in traveling or in ordinary relations with your friends every day, these gorgeous things happen of themselves. Those are the true pleasures. So at the level of mystical experience, the most astounding insights of, where you can go into the deep, most trivial everyday affairs. This is behind all those Zen stories of the monk who was sweeping the courtyard and a small piece of broken tile zipped out from under his broom and struck against a bamboo and made a plop. And that sound he suddenly saw as containing the entire secret of the universe. One can do it from anything. As I say, it could be the ashes in the ashtray. It could be light in a dewdrop. It could be the sound of a bell. Any point becomes the takeoff point, because there's a principle in operation which the Japanese call jiji muge. Now the word ji means any experience which you could identify as a thing or an event. And the doubling of the word GG means between thing event and thing event. Muge. Mu means no. Ge means barrier or obstruction. Or put it in another way, everything event implies all the others. And here, in this way, you begin to see that that is actually so. When you pick up a chain, you pick up one link and the rest comes. In this, you pick up one thing event and the universe comes up with it. Because you see, there are no separate things. It's all a single unified process, no longer divided into the voluntary and the involuntary, the I and the you, or the I and the it. Because it is the big happening, which is neither voluntary nor involuntary, which is neither free nor determined. All these are mere ideas about it and about. You've abandoned all that. You've abandoned philosophy totally. Because you see it's just a net designed for catching water. And when all that's gone and that whole attempt to clutch life, to capture the pleasure, has disintegrated, there it is. And you needn't feel anxious about, will it stay? It's a gorgeous thing to feel you no longer got to worry whether it will stick around. Because you know that if you do worry, you'll shoo it away. So it's a tremendous relief, you see, not to have to bother with, will it stick around? Will I lose my insight? Will my Satori take wing and go off with the bats? You just forget it. Because the more you let go of it, the more it stays. And you don't even have to worry about, will you be sure to let go of it? Because that too is a hang-up. And you can begin, you see, from your very weakness. That's your strength. It's not your big ego and your big will that is the strong thing here. It's your slobbiness, it's your weakness, it's your foolish side that is your strong suit here. See? Yokadaishi puts it in this way. You cannot take hold of it. You cannot get rid of it. In not being able to get it, let me repeat this, in not being able to get it, you get it. When you are silent, it speaks. When you speak, it is silent. The great gate is wide open and nobody obstructing it. So we'll have an intermission. Tonight, at any rate, we've got to go through. When we communicate, what are we really communicating about? What is the content of communication? Because you see, McLuhan has come up with a very strange idea that the medium itself is the message. Or putting it in a punny way to make it clearer, the medium is the massage. Not so much, therefore, finally, the content of what is being said is the thing you're getting over. But what you're getting over is the way of saying it. So we have to go into what it is, finally, that we are communicating about when we communicate. What do we want to tell our friends, our other people, our other selves? Now, I had a great deal of trouble really sympathizing with McLuhan's point of view, especially in what he has to say about television, where he feels that the medium of television is highly participative, and that the mosaic technique of bringing the image across onto the television screen is something entirely different, say, from a film or from a painting. He expresses the notion that television is more tactile than visual, and therefore it involves you as the sense of touch involves you. You see, because touch is the fundamental sense. All the five senses are specializations of the sense of touch. So when you see, you're touching light. When you hear, you're touching air. And when you taste and smell, especially in smell, you're touching gas, the quality of gas. And finally, with your fingers, you have, in a way, the most primitive sense, the sense that is least acute in its differentiations. But nevertheless, you see, all of them are forms of touch. And so you could say, as the Buddhists say, there is one sense behind all our senses. They have a sixth sense. For example, they use the word vijnana, which means consciousness. And they have nose consciousness, eye consciousness, ear consciousness, touch consciousness, taste consciousness. 5. But behind that, they have mano-vijnana, which means mind consciousness. That is to say, the unifying of the senses so that you will put together the sight of fish and the smell of fish and be able to integrate them and say, well, this is a single experience. The fish looks so and smells so, touches so. And so by the integration of the senses, all being forms of touch, you can, of course, eventually come to a state of consciousness where you can hear colors and see sounds, if you're very, very sensitive indeed. So you might say now then that all communication is information. But I want to show you that straight information is not the final thing we're trying to communicate. You see, we live now in a culture where there is great disagreement about the values of life. What do we live for? There is no consensus, because all the religions, which were the philosophies which gave us what life is supposed to be all about, they're all fragmented. And so there is, being no common religion, there is no common view as to what life is about. In default of that common view, there is, especially in the academic world where people think out ethical and political problems, a tacit agreement that the highest value we have, that we can all agree upon, is survival value. And therefore, naturally, when we communicate messages which have to do with survival, i.e., where to find the food, where to avoid the enemy, then one says we are communicating about essentials. During the war, World War II, a friend of mine was in the office of the president of Northwestern University, and he had a number of watercolors around his office.
Not yet.
And he said to this friend of mine,
Blessings of the light.
well, now we're at war, waving his hand at the paintings, all this is irrelevant.
Forward or a fool?
We come down to essentials. Is this trip really necessary? Is this trip really necessary? In other words, what do you mean when you say, is this trip really necessary? When you say essentials, priority is given to essential industries in war. They are the industries of survival. Because we got it into our common sense, even though we may not have intended to do this, but it is fundamentally established in our common sense that survival is the thing that is good. While there is life, there is hope. And this, of course, is a really asinine point of view. Because it is not survival just going on that we want. Yes, we want survival, but survival in a certain way, that is to say, in a certain style. And you will therefore see that in the end, while there is always a survival content in communication, so far as that communication is information, what is finally more valued about communication than the survival value information is the style in which it's given. It's just in the same way as lovemaking. Finally, when it comes down to it, what do you want to say to the person? I love you. What are you going to communicate? An engineer would say, when you say I love you, it means that we're going to do reproduction and therefore continue the race. But that's not the point at all. It's obvious that it's not. What are children for? Just to continue? No, they're to be loved. And how do you love things? You stroke them. You give them a massage. If it moves, fondle it. And so it is finally what you're communicating to someone you love is a rhythm. Whether it's the rhythm of sexual intercourse, or whether it's the rhythm of dancing, or whether it's the rhythm of verbal play, as in telling a story or in singing a song, what you're communicating is a sort of caressing rhythm which says to you, I'm so glad you're here, and that you can receive my communication, which is about nothing, only to say, in this way of a dancing with you, I love you. That's really what it's all about. So then, you see, the Buddhists call that factor of communication suchness. For example, when we talk, you understand my words because each word that I use has a meaning. And so the words that I use refer to something other than themselves. So I use these symbols, and you get what I'm talking about. Now listen carefully.
I'm overburdened.
What does that mean? That I communicate meaning to you by words is a situation. Now what's the meaning of that situation? And you meditate a little bit on that, and you discover that it has no meaning at all.
I can't carry anymore.
A cloud has no meaning because it isn't a symbol. It's what we call a thing. The word cloud, the sound, cloud, means that. But what does that mean? You see, it's not a word. So it doesn't mean anything. A cloud is jazz. It's the part of the dance of the universe.
You need to go back.
And so, likewise, when I make sense to you and you make sense to me, we have a kind of interlocking that would correspond perhaps to a spider's web, where various rings of thread are joined to rings of thread inside rings of thread. It's joined together. So we join together by talking, see? We play together by talking. But what that all means is some kind of jazz. And that's suchness. In the practice of meditation, the most important thing is to get down to suchness in everything that goes on. A great Japanese Zen master, when he was about to die, wrote a poem which said, "From the bathtub to the bathtub, I have uttered stuff and nonsense." In other words, the bathtub in which the baby is washed at birth and the bathtub in which the corpse is washed before burial. Alpha to Omega, maternity ward to crematorium. All this time, he said, I have talked only nonsense. And this is part of the whole thing of Zen, to be able to hear all voices, all communications, all gestures, all shapes, all sensations whatsoever, in their fundamental form as lalling. When a baby starts to talk in the beginning, it speaks what Jakob Böhme called the natural language. And he says that man at his fall talking about the fall of Adam, lost the natural language. And the natural language is understood by birds and beasts because they speak it. Because a lot of what birds say is not communicative in our ordinary sense of delivering information. Some of it delivers information, but a great deal of what they say doesn't deliver any communication. It is just playing with sound. And a great deal of what we do is playing with sound. I'm particularly aware of this as a philosopher, because a lot of people will be very critical of what I say and say, you don't really make any sense at all. You sound as if you do. You beguile and hoodwink the public into thinking that you have got something important to say, and all you're doing is making noises. And I say, granted, that's absolutely true. But if I make interesting noises and manage to make a play of ideas that is in some way musical, see, fascinating, people say, well, it's the same sort of thing that we enjoy out of looking at a mountain, or watching waves, or the flight of birds, because it is the stars. You may remember that this morning I described a situation as follows. I'm talking to you, and you understand what my words mean. Situation A. Situation B is taking situation A as a whole, my talking to you and you understanding what I mean. What does that situation mean? And we find it doesn't mean anything. This could be a way, when we say something is meaningless, it's a way of putting it down. But on the other hand, when you consider a mountain, or a cloud, or a tree, and ask what does it mean, and you realize it's not a word, it's simply an authentic existence in its own right, it doesn't mean anything, but it's great. And so in this way, the nearest thing in that kind of achievement that nature does all the time in human activities is music. Once when Gustav Holst was giving a lecture on music, he started out this way. He said, music is a natural and universal language. He took a step backwards and said, that's so important I'm going to say it again. Music is a natural and universal language. But nobody knows what it's about. Sometimes we say music represents emotions. But a great deal of music, although it has a very strong feeling quality, does not represent specific emotions. Inferior music copies natural noises. The sound of water, the thunder of the hooves of horses, or in that dreadful composition, the 1812 Overture of Tchaikovsky, you hear Napoleon's armies retreating from Moscow. Or in some of the bad work of Debussy, like La Cathédrale Engloutie, makes noises like bells tolling from under the water. But our very great musicians of the West, Bach, Scarlatti, Mozart, and so on, they don't do anything with the music except create elaborate patterns of sound. Bach is very mathematical, and yet, curiously, despite his tremendously developed intellect, the music has a very strong feeling quality, joyous and exuberant. But it's all pure play with sound. And therefore, one might say, the communication that you make with music is, in a curious way, the most important kind of communication you can make, even though you're saying nothing. The music delivers no information, but what a form of communication. And so it is also with dancing with somebody. All you are saying with dancing is, I love you, if you're delivering any message at all. I want to play with you. all I really want to do is, baby, be friends with you. What does it mean? What is the content of friendship? You can't say. What is the content of love? I want to screw you. That's a sort of part of it. It's incidental. It's a way of saying very strongly, yes, I do want to be with you. But basically, love is something we can't put our finger on at all. We say, we use such words as warmth, tenderness, all these things, they don't really get to the point. When you're loving somebody, you are simply delighting in that person as such, as if another human organism, in its mental and its physical aspects, were a piece of music, or a work of art, or a glorious morning that you were just enjoying every inch of it. And you go over another person's physical form and look at it from every possible point of view and play with it and tickle it. And that's what it's about. It's the adoration of the form of a human being. And you do that adoring in terms of physical contacts that are, say, dancing with your fingers across the skin, or whatever it may be. But this is the nitty-gritty, the nub of love. It is not that I here and now solemnly undertake to support you for the rest of your life. That's a delusion of the West. You think you don't really love me unless you will sign on the dotted line here and give me this contract. And then I know I can rely on you always. What did you want it for? Why did you want the contract? Just to be fed indefinitely? Just to be supported indefinitely? What a bore. One wants something much more than that. You want to be played with indefinitely. That's more like it. To have this vibrancy going through you. And this then is why music, of all the arts, is the most meaningless art. After all, music is a major industry in the United States. The money invested in orchestras, in operas, in the recording business is fantastic. Horse racing is a very great industry, but music, I think, probably absorbs more millions than horse racing. And you could make a case that this was a complete dissipation. It solves no useful purpose. It doesn't help anyone to survive. It is a noise, meaningless noise, endless meaningless noise going down the drain. All these energies of orchestras, all the power of electronics that delivers this, is total waste. And people get hooked on it. They get a thing called chorditis, which is addiction to harmonics. And they have to have this repeated, day after day. Some people get up in the morning and they can't function till they've had a cup of coffee. But many more people get up in the morning and can't function till they've turned on the radio and got some music. Now, what would you say then if a culture which took this standpoint? Music not allowed. Music is a diversion from reality. You know that kind of awful utilitarian attitude. But really, one of the basic things, you see, that we live for. What makes it worth surviving and going on is there can be such a thing as music. There can be dancing. In other words, that we can do things that are absolutely irrelevant so far as mere survival is concerned. Now we have the proverb that all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Dull for work. And people who play, justifying their play by making it a means to that end, those people never play. Because you don't really play until you get so absorbed in the music or the dancing or the whatever, the making the pot or doing the calligraphy, until you get so absorbed in it that there is no reason for it other than what you're doing. The sheer delight of that. Then, because you are absorbed in something for which there is no ulterior motive, which is pure play, this, by way of a byproduct, produces sanity. In other words, if you play in order to be healthy, in order to be sane, you are not playing. But if you play just to play, then as a byproduct, as something you couldn't aim at directly, you are sane. And so a culture which allows for this, which allows for this sort of goofing, is a healthy culture. This is not the culture that we live in, because it is extremely anxious about play. Everybody, when they play, they have to find an excuse for it. They say, well, this is culture. You try and persuade the city of San Francisco to support its opera. What sort of propaganda do you have to use? You can't say, we should have a good opera house here because we just like going to the opera. Say, this improves the city's image. After all, they have it in New York. And that is because we do not allow ourselves the idea that life is not serious. Because somehow you feel if you aren't engaged in something serious, you're a loafer. You're not contributing to the social welfare. And so in this way the artist has a peculiar role in this society. Very, very interesting. Because the artist is a very deceptive fellow. He appears to be the supreme luxury, the irrelevant fellow. You can afford an artist, you can afford to buy paintings if you have surplus money. That's a luxury. So you can support an artist, and we call it fine arts. The completely useless person who makes paintings, which are sort of big labels or posters that you stick on your utilitarian walls to decorate them. But on the other hand,
this is battle meditation,
the artist is
and I'm playing
the
it with my
man
dad.
who shows you the future.
He played solitaire
long
with
before
his dad.
everybody else sees it. The artist is the eye-opener.
Back in the day.
Just because the artist is distinct in role from the preacher.
Yeah, this is
and the
already a
philosopher.
conversation right now.
The artist can get away with all sorts of things.
If you ask me a question, it is.
For example,
I was writing about this on the Now channel
in
today.
our culture, if you're a university professor, a doctor,
Oh shit.
or a minister, take these three professions, teacher, doctor, minister, you have to be very careful about your private life. Because the moment you have any alliances that are not
I
quite
forgot what
regular,
we're doing.
people's tongues begin to wag. Why do they wag? Because they say the way you behave is inconsistent with your profession, with what you profess. You are teaching people the good life, the healthy life, and you live in this disreputable way. You have a mistress, you have something or other going on. But the moment an artist should take a mistress, this is what is expected.
But that
says, "Oh,
leads
he's
to the
an
question, how
In
do
other
we
words,
do a
he doesn't
conversation
matter.
experiment?
He's irrelevant. He's an entertainer, some sort of clown. But on the other hand, if you belong to high culture, you patronize artists. See? So the role of the artist is very fascinating because he
I hear
appears to
myself.
be the
Oh, yes, I
clown,
can.
the jester, the absolutely
uh,
unimportant and irrelevant person.
Usually this is what I do.
And yet it's actually through the artist that we learn.
I had it too loud and it was kind of fucked
Not
up
through
last
the
time.
preacher. Not through the philosopher.
This is more
Not
like how
through
it's
the
supposed to
professor.
sound.
It is the artist teaches us, whether he does it visually, painting, sculpture, tactile, or whether
But I noticed
above all in
last
music.
time
So a man like Mozart
the amount of latency between the two
could
was
well claim to
fluctuating.
be the greatest
Sometimes it was
composer
fucked up, and sometimes it was very short latency, which is what it's supposed to be. A very
kind
small
of
amount of
gay,
latency
happy-go-lucky fellow.
for kind of a crunchy meta feedback sound. It may annoy the shit out of people, but I don't care. I like how it sounds.
Etc. But what a songbird, what a nightingale. And so then to this day, listening to Mozart is in England, the Glyndebourne Opera. This is about the farthest out fashionable, aristocratic thing you can do. To go to this lovely country house in Sussex and hear the Mozart operas. It's as much a matter of status as going to church. Almost more so.
Inventory is full.
You should read, if you can get hold of it, an
Leave a
interview
sound
with
check on
George
so I can
Harrison
listen to my
in
YouTube video
a recent
playing
issue
here.
of the East Village Other, where he explains the deep
Which
philosophy
is
of
playing
music
the potion
that
room.
they understand and follow. How
I got a storm shield.
the very nature of sound reveals the meaning of the world.
It's a
And
reference
why?
to
Because of
Warcraft.
this, he regards himself as a Hindu. In Hinduism, the fundamental source of life is called Vak. Vak in Sanskrit means the word,
Vak.
to speak. But not so much the word that communicates as the sound, the utterance, the flow of tone. So you have in India the
I
use
don't normally
of
just sit here
mantra,
and talk over and on while I lecture, but
the use of chanted words as one of the very basic forms
I just want to
of
listen to this
yoga,
part real quick.
understanding the mystery of the world. The Hindus use the word Om, which would be spelled out A-U-M, because the letter A, is in the back of the throat. You push it through the vowel to Aum, and is at the lips. So the word Om comprehends the whole range of sound. It's called the pranava. And Om simply means, well, it is the sound. All sounds are basically the sound Om, but varied. The word that not only signifies, but also is what there is. Everything is Om. Om, sweet Om. The whole universe is Om. And so this is a very good word because you can use it instead of God. God has all sorts of nasty associations attached to it. The political boss of the world, the preacher, the prig, the nosy Parker in charge of everything, the rotten grandfather, and all that, the sentimental mother of the world, or whatever it is. And the word God, therefore, is a distasteful word now to most Westerners. But Om has no associations with it. I mean, you might have encountered it in a Vedanta society and associated with swamis in yellow robes or something. But on the whole, Om has no association. And so it is a clean word, and it has no meaning, except it is the very pulse of life. And so I'm spreading a rumor. In Buddhism, you know, there is a mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. And Om means nothing except everything. Mani means a jewel. Padma is a lotus. Hum is hooray, you know? So the jewel and the lotus. In other words, imagine a mandala, you see, which is a lotus flower, with all those petals spreading out from it. And right bang in the middle of that there is a little crystal ball, or a diamond. And you look into that, and it contains the reflection of everything. You go way, way, way into that thing, down, 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 down. You know? And that's the ultimate turn-on. So, Om, and at the end, Hum, or H-U-M. You can say hum in English. Hum, hum, you hum. Now, there's a new religion existing called Hum. And this religion has no hierarchy, no organization, no doctrines whatsoever. No words. Only music and ritual. And we will find in a little while that Hum is really what most people belong to. And but you can't pin it down. There is no address to write to. There's nothing to join. It's just something that people do, like they shave and brush their teeth and eat breakfast. So they hum. Well, now, it's very, very fascinating for purposes of understanding music as communication to look for a moment at fundamental differences between Western and Oriental music. Because I know a very, very great musicologist who thoroughly understands the world of Bach and Beethoven and is one of the greatest scholars in music I've ever run into. But when to his ear, Hindu music is childish, and he sees no subtlety in it. He's quite deaf. But when it comes to Chinese and Japanese music, most Westerners are flabbergasted. They can't make any sense of it at all, because it sounds as if somebody were making the most ridiculous noises. So when it was a Japanese no drama singer comes on, we think he's sounding as if he's being strangled. But he's giving sounds of passionate love. See? But to our ears, that's deplorable, you know, but we want to give examples of love. Etc., you know. We really have said we're in love. Well, now, here is the thing. In Western music, when we study music, the first thing we learn is notation. We have, most people begin with the piano, or at any rate some instrument, where the important thing is to be able to read the music and then do the stuff from the written paper. Now this limits you in a curious way, because our notation, first of all, is based on the chromatic scale. And secondly, it has fixed rhythmic intervals. You see your whole note, half note, quarter note, eighth note, 16th note. And you can change the value by dotting them to give them half their value. And you tend to write in bars, 4/4 time, 3/8, or whatever it may be. And when an Oriental listens to our music, it doesn't matter whether it's a love song or a grandiose paean of praise or whatever. All of it sounds like a military march, because it's that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here's it all the time. And he hears a mechanism in it. See? He hears this absolute regularity. Now, in Indian music, you'll have bars. Very long measure, you can count 20 to the bar, times more. And when you learn music from an Hindu teacher, you don't learn notation. You learn directly from the teacher. In other words, he takes the instrument and plays it, and you copy him with the same instrument sitting in front of him. And they think, you see, that notation could never record music. They do use a notation. They use a notation to remember simply themes. There is a certain rag, a certain theme, and they can write that down. But they don't play from it. What they do is they, according to certain traditional procedures, they improvise on the basic forms. And you therefore play the instrument. And what you're trying to do is to make it as completely as possible responsive to the subtle motions of which a human organism is capable. In other words, just as in moving your hand, there's an infinity of waves you can put it through. So likewise in using your voice, there is an infinity of sound that you can produce. Because the same you can with a stringed instrument in moving your finger, where there are no rigid stops as there would be on a piano. So on the continuum of a violin, you can move your finger and produce an infinity of subtle sound. And what they do is they delight in the infinite possibility of making sound with the human organism. And they like instruments which are very easily and directly related to the organism. So the flute, the vina, the drums. See, these are direct human contact with an instrument. With a piano, you've got something interspersed. You've got a hammer mechanism and a rigidly tuned string. With a harpsichord, the same way, the pluck. And when Wanda Landowska, marvelous as she is, plays the harpsichord, you get a hurdy-gurdy effect. Clickety-clickety-click, clop, 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 clickety-click, clop, clop, chickety-chick, chick, chick, clop, clop, clickety-click, click, 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 click. You hear this going on all the time. With a clavichord, there is a difference because the clavichord doesn't have a mechanical relationship between the finger and the string, so that by every variation of touch you make on a clavichord is represented in the sound. In other words, the piano and the harpsichord are like electric typewriters, which have a uniform touch, whereas the clavichord is more like an old-fashioned typewriter, where however hard you hit has some effect on the print. So, in Oriental music, then, while there is an incredibly subtle discipline, and a Hindu drummer can do the most astounding things, and you can count it out, he counts it out, in these very, very elaborate patterns. But at the same time, there is an attitude about it that's just fascinating. We attended a concert at the Young Museum a few weeks ago, where there was Ali Akbar Khan's orchestra. And there was a drummer in this who was just out of this world. And the wonderful thing about it was that as he was playing with the rest of the orchestra, they were all talking to each other with their instruments. And they made eye contact while they were playing. And this guy was just in sheer delight. He was laughing as he was playing. And all the other musicians were just loving him. So that he wasn't this dead, earnest person looking at his music, and reading that and doing it. He was joining in with everybody, dancing with them. His fingers were like butterflies, hummingbirds, better to say, just vibrating in the most extraordinary way, because it takes years and years and years to learn this. But he was really enjoying it. But what was he saying? They have a language for the drums, and they can speak a drum rhythm by using syllables like dit, di, dit, da, dit, di, dit, da, or din, meaning one kind of a hit, and din and thin, din, tin, din, tin, din, tin, din, tin, din, dit, di, dit, da, dit, di, dit, da, dit, da, 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 and they explain a rhythm like this sometimes first. They say it, and then they play it. But what's all about? It's all about dit, da. dit da. I suppose some of you have read a book of mine called The Joyous Cosmology, in which I referred to once a very curious experience I had.
This is the test.
Hindu music. I happen to have acquired
There are 3 microphone inputs.
some of this extraordinary Mexican mushroom, and I was feeling awful. I'd come back from a trip to the east and was tired, and I had a sore throat and was just lousy. So I took this thing. And at the first, it just felt just terrible. Everything turned into mud. And you know what you expect of mushrooms, of fungus, everything fungoid and kind of clammy and dark. Well, after a while it all changed. And I found myself listening to this Hindu music. I didn't know what it was, because my host, whose house I was at, didn't explain anything. And I thought, when I listened to this, what kind of idiocy is going on? I thought, you see, my friend with whom I was spending the day is a pretty wild kind of fellow. And I thought he had put on a tape recording of his and his friends' antics, because they weren't doing anything that anybody's supposed to do. It was like children making faces. You know how they do this kind of things that children love to do. Something, these awful faces, and make weird noises. I thought, this is just something absolutely absurd going on. And then came this dit-da business in the middle of it. So I said, Roger, hey, let me see the album. And I got the case. Here it says, Classical Music of India, edited by Anand Danielu, who is the most scholarly, respectable pundit on the subject of Hindu music. I said, somebody's pulling my leg. No, not at all. Here was this just babbling sound. Not only do they do the dit-da business, but they also could use their voices like oboes. You know how you could put a clothespin on your nose and do an oboe stomp. And it sounded like this, and it was just this whole kind of business of children just going out of their heads. Well, I listened to this and I suddenly realized that that's what life's all about. And you know, it was the most fantastic, sudden recognition that everything in this world is gloriously meaningless. And there's curlicues like on ferns. We get mixed up about it because sometimes we think that a play that is going on, when you see a fern, it has first of all the main branch, then it has sub-branches, and out of these sub-branches come sub-sub-branches, and out of the sub-sub-branches come sub-sub-sub-branches, and so you get a fern. So now you could number each of these levels on which things are happening. And you say, well, this is a number 1 level, this is a number 42 level, this is a number 65 level. And you judge events and say it's good, it's bad, it's proper, it's improper. But what you don't recognize is that you say something is improper because you thought it was a 63 level, whereas really it was 112. You didn't know, you didn't realize the level the thing was on. So actually, the whole play of human life, with all its joys and sorrows, its tragedies, its evils, its good, is just something like a fern. It has tumors on it. That means just simply another clan is making its life there. See, a clan of bugs of some kind are living there too. They're doing their stuff. They're living off the fern, the fern's living off something else. We're all leaning on each other in one way. Now I saw this whole thing as a fantastic play. So, in order to get into it, can you get into that state, you see? You get into it by listening to sound. That's one way in. There are lots of ways in. But one of the easiest ways is through concentration on a tone. Because, you see, this is the easiest way to stop thinking for most people. If you just concentrate on a single sound, it's very easy to do it, and this stops your thoughts. In other words, it stops you talking to yourself inside your head, verbalizing. And the important thing is, if you want the vision of the world as it really is, you have to stop talking, at least temporarily. It doesn't mean that talking is a bad thing. It means it's too much of a good thing. So that if you silence talking, and you experience yourself just in the same way as you experience that's what's going on. And it may be going on, you know, in a kind of a way that you call nice, which is no, it may be going on that way. But so what? Finally it is that.
So I was going to discuss stopping thinking in
That's
regards to battle
And
meditation.
We're all taught by our mothers.
I've referenced it a couple times in my
Put a
voice
value
memos
on
that I've yet to stream or attach to a stream yet.
See,
But
when it goes a certain way,
but
the rhythm of
essentially you
life
feel this
goes in a
feeling
certain
when you
way
successfully
say,
stop
"Ooh,
thinking,
watch out, watch out, watch out, watch out, because that may be the end. What will
which
the
I
end
can
be?
get to in battle meditation, where I don't have to think about which direction am I going, which
What's wrong with
action
that?
am I issuing to the character, where's the threat, where is the treasure.
Ah,
It's like floating up a little bit out
the
of
rhythm of
yourself.
life goes in a certain way
It's
when we
a,
say, "Ooh, watch out, watch out,
It's
watch
it's
out, watch
literally
out, because that
the
may be the end.
transcending
What will
of
the
where you're
end be?
usually stuck, having to mediate your damn stupid ass ego,
What's wrong with that?
which is just an imaginary character from which to drag around the
Stop.
corpse of your body.
Have to stop. Things that go
And so
on
it's really
have to go
interesting that
off,
by
have to
pretending
go
to be
up.
this character in this game,
Watch out, watch out, watch out, watch out.
going
because
around
that may be
slaying
end.
the
What will
evil
the end be? One.
and battling malevolence and facing mortality,
wrong with that?
or any activity that is playfully celebrating, you can
Watch out, because that may
get that stop thinking,
See,
float up thing where
that's
you
what's
just
happening.
kind of feel.
And we're all taught by our mothers and fathers. Put a value on
You
it.
feel the
See, when it goes a certain
stop.
way,
You feel the power of stop.
the rhythm of life goes
Uh,
on that way. But so what? Finally,
Where
it is that.
you're actually free from concern in that moment.
That's what's happening. And we're all
Because you
taught by
notice
our
yourself
mothers.
not think anymore about what you're doing. You're just
Put a
auto
value
doing
on
it
it.
at that point. And that's what a Zen master and a
See,
speedrunner
when it goes
have
a certain
synonymously.
way,
Someone who's
the rhythm of
overlearned
life
a
goes in a
text,
certain
so
way
they
when you
understand
say, "Ooh,
what it is that
watch
they
out,
understand,
watch out,
the
watch out,
information
watch
that
out,
goes
because
into the
that may be
activity
end.
of the
What will
task.
the end be? One. What's wrong with that? Out. And you experience yourself just in the same way as you experience that's what's going on. And it may be going on, you know, in a kind of a way that you call nice, which is no, it may be going on that way. But so what? Finally, it is that. That's what's happening. And we're all taught by our mothers and fathers to put a value on it. See, when it goes a certain way, the rhythm of life goes in a certain way when we say, "Ooh, watch out, watch out, watch out, watch out," because that may be the end. What will the end be? One. What's wrong with that? Things that stop have to stop. Things that go on have to go off, and things that go off have to go on. But you see, we get involved by putting a value on it all. Right now, I could say that's bad, you shouldn't do it, but at the same time, getting involved and putting values on it's all part of the game too. Getting hung up, getting hooked. So you don't get unhooked by saying to yourself, "I shouldn't be attached. I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do that. But all you do is you see that getting hooked on it is simply another form of it. More nonsense. More jazz. But deeper jazz. So like you feel you have an ego, that's an illusion. But it's a very weird illusion. See? It's a very far out scene. A person who you might call a square, who's thoroughly committed to the illusions of standard life, is a very far out person because he doesn't know where he started. He's completely lost. But you could say it's a great show to get that far out, to get that involved in seriousness. So when you look at a square who has this determined, set, inflexible attitude, you have to say, secretly, you laugh and say, my, you're doing a wonderful job. How far out? So you can learn in this way to love squares. And this is the only way that will ever change it. We must never condemn the squares with harsh language, because they are very far out. They don't know. Involved, in other words, in the ultimate curlicues. It's like a labyrinth. See, all life is a labyrinth. It's a system of tubes. And there are tubes within tubes within tubes. And upon the very, very great fringes of this labyrinth, you get all kinds of hothouse growths. Very complicated games. So complicated that the people involved in them are lost. But that's simply a function of being a long way from the center. When a fern or any form of plant expands from its center, what is happening is this. Inside the stems and the stalks and the tubes which constitute this organism, they're all little creatures. And they're traveling along. And they're getting out there. They want to go out. Of course, there's always somebody along with them who says, now be careful. But you get too far out, because if you get too far out, you spoil the form. Instead of keeping inside the bounds of the fern, you'll just go off into gas. And that would be awful. See, because you're fern, you're not gas. But those little creatures out in the end say, man, we'd like a gas. So they want to get way off. But it is a result of the tension between those little fellows that want to go way up, see, and the people who want to stay in, that you get the outline, the clear form of the leaf. They're working against each other. But they are working, even though the one thinks it's right and the other thinks it's right. They're both right and they're both wrong. They're both right and wrong. But they do by being both, and in a counter position like this, they create what we call existence, what we call the shape of the leaf, the form of the fern. So you will find, of course, that some of them are in fact escaping. Some of them are going off into gas. And some of them are not. Some of them are staying put. And if there weren't some of them going off into gas, there would be no energy in the thing. You see, all energy is a quality of follow-through. When you hit a golf ball, you mustn't stop the hit at the ball. You have to go like that, see? Right through. So all energies of life have in them a possibility of an excess, of going too far. When you bring up your children, and you tell your children your various far-out ideas, and the children suddenly believe in them. I'm horrified. No? All kinds of philosophy I've talked about is being believed by children. And they're taking it literally. I think, oh my God, what will they do next? But everybody feels that way in regard to the strength of a younger generation that is coming. Because this younger generation is energy. See, we think about young people. We have terrible ideas. We think that we know what life is and that they have to be told, that they will learn it from us and be like us. We don't take that attitude when we see the new vegetables come up in the spring. We don't say the vegetables have to be educated to be vegetables. We say, hooray, at last, young vegetables with all the life and energy in them. New meals for everything. So when we see young people come up, we say, Good gracious, isn't this great to see the human race is still doing its stuff? I wonder what they'll have to teach us. Because wisdom doesn't come from above down, it comes from below up. That's where the wisdom is. Surging into it. The old people, they have a function. But they have it, in order to fulfill that function, they have to understand first that they can learn from the young sources. If they understand that, then they can be wise and be teachers. If they don't understand that, they never can. To be wise, you have to, that's the meaning of saying to enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to become again as a child. And finally, to get back to my point, to become as a child means that you do things which adults consider unimportant. There is a wonderful Buddhist character. His name is Hote in Japanese, Putai in Chinese. And he carries around a bag, an enormous bag, in which he collects rubbish, every kind of inconsequential rubbish, and gives it away to children. Because children understand the meaning and significance of rubbish. Something which my father, when I was a small boy, once said, "You're a picker-up of unconsidered trifles." Because the rubbish is the most wonderful thing in the world, from the point of view of a child. So, once a Zen master was asked, what is the most valuable thing in the world? And he answered, the head of a dead cat. Why? Because no one can put a price on it. So in this man, you see, who is wandering around picking up rubbish, all the trivialities of life, who sees leaves floating down in the wind and laughs at them, this is becoming again as the child. In other words, from the child's point of view, the things which the adult considers irrelevant to survival are perfectly important. And so children collect pebbles and colored glass and all sorts of trivia which they consider as precious as diamonds. The adults say, oh, frippery. But they really have the secret. Now, the child, as child, doesn't know how to play the adult's game, which is a power game. And so has to be educated to learn the values of the power game, to learn what's what and what is important. But when he has mastered that game, he realizes it has no rewards. That all the things that the adults thought they were gaining by their power game are, after all, not worth having. That's why you can be rich and miserable. So that having learned and having seen through the adult power game, you come back to the point of the child. And so, well, let's have a brief intermission. We'll serve refreshments after the seminar. Just a stretch. In the last session of this particular course, which is an introduction to Oriental philosophy, I tried to condense the fundamental principles of what you can call the central viewpoint of Hinduism, Vedanta, not so much the doctrine as the experiential realization that what you are, basically, is the same as the root and ground of the universe. In other words, in the formula Atman, the self, is Brahman, the ground of being. Now today, I want to relate this way of playing hide and seek with the very design of Hindu society. Because Hinduism is difficult to characterize as a religion, especially because we belong to a religion where in its institutionalized form it can very well degenerate into a religion that's for Sundays only. That doesn't apply to every detail of life. In other words, when a Hindu brushes his teeth, it's a religious act. There is not such a thing as a Christian way of brushing your teeth. But in Hindu life, all the details of life are Hinduism. So then, underneath all the presuppositions of Hinduism can be found a transition from one kind of culture to another, from a hunting culture to an agrarian culture. And this explains a great deal about this way of life. Now, in a hunting culture, which is a culture on the move, nomadic, every man knows the whole culture. In other words, you do not get a high specialization, division of labor. A man who is a hunter has to know how to make clothes, how to skin animals, how to cook them, how to shoot them, how to trail them. He has to know every kind of skill because he's often alone. And in a hunting culture, you do not get a special division of priesthood from ordinary people. Every man in his own way is capable of being a priest, but some more so than others, not by virtue of any ordination or schooling that they've received, but by their receptivity, because the priest or holy man of a hunting culture is called a shaman. A shaman is an individual who separates himself from society for a certain period and goes alone into forests or mountains to commune with what he will usually call the ancestors. That is to say, with his basic origins. And he will find something by way of a spiritual experience for himself, not through any teacher, not through any previous authority. He finds it genuinely on his own. And the shaman, therefore, goes into solitude to find out who he really is. Because in society, everybody is busy telling you who you are. And you rely on others to see yourself. But to find himself, in other words, to find out what all this really is all about, the spiritually minded man of the hunting culture goes alone. And so the culture of the American Indians is to a very large extent hunting culture, and you will find the spiritual man of the American Indians is a shaman. However, when a hunting culture becomes settled, it becomes agrarian. There arises farming, looking after the land, and then you get a completely different kind of society. Let me suggest that it's something like this. Where do agrarian communities settle? Where do they build a village? Usually at a crossroads, especially if roads be crossed with water, a river. And where the crossing meets, the agrarian village settles itself and protects itself by building a pale. We say a person is beyond the pale. That means he's an outcast. He lives outside the village. He's a pariah. But in the village, notice that the pale, having been built around the crossroads, it divides the village into 4 sections. And oddly enough, There are 4 divisions of labor in all fundamental agrarian societies. And these consist of 1, the priests. You know, the word clever, clerk, cleric, and clear are all the same word. It meant someone who's literate. Clever. Also clear. Put it down clearly. You can't do that unless you're literate. And so if you're a literate person, you're a cleric. And clergy is the same word as clever in Old English. Much conceit of clergy is an Old English phrase meaning he's intellectually snobbish. So that's your caste number 1. Caste number 2, warrior. Or, incidentally, ruler. 3, merchant or craftsman. And 4, laborer. Unskilled. So now, what are these? They are 4 castes or 4 roles. And in society where there's a division of labor, because an agricultural society is more complex than a hunting culture, we immediately get division of labor, and we all play different roles. That is to say, assume different masks for purposes of living in this kind of community. All of you, you see, are essentially clerics. You are what the Hindus would call Brahmins, because you're all being trained in the university. So the Hindu name for this class is Brahmana, for this class Kshatriya, for this caste Vaishya, and for this class Shudra. So those are the basis of the 4 castes. And so if you are in the pale, if you belong to the community, you have to be typified. They say, is you is or is you ain't. Into which of these do you fit? And you must fit into one of these. Now, caste is something, of course, which has got a very bad name from a modern point of view, both modern point of view with us and with the modern India. Because they say, once you get into a caste, you're stuck. If you are born to a laborer you must be. If you are born to a warrior, you must be a warrior or a ruler. You could never become a cleric. And we think that's pretty terrible. Because in our culture, we work under the assumption that you as an individual are free to choose whatever occupation you will follow. But unfortunately, this involves going to school. And for certain purposes, going to school is one of the worst things you can do. For example, if you want to become a completely fantastic expert carpenter, you have to begin the trade at the age of 7 at the latest. And your father, if he is a carpenter, is obviously the best teacher you can have. In a very ancient form of agrarian culture, as in India or as in Japan or China, a young man who was son of a carpenter would become fascinated with his father's occupation. And that would mean a very special relationship would grow up between him and his father, which does not grow up in our culture, because most of us do not know what our fathers are doing. They go away to a mysterious office or factory where they do something called making money as the main reason for the incidental occupation which they pursue there. But the children and the wife have no active part in that occupation whatsoever. They know Papa only as a kind of clown who returns home in the evening having made money, and one dad's money is the same as another dad's money. It makes no difference, except that everybody wants more. They don't give a damn how he gets it, so long as he doesn't complain too much. So the child, instead of learning and participating in his close father relationship, in learning an occupation or a trade or an art, is sent off to an impersonalized institution to be taught to be everything and nothing, and therefore doesn't learn early enough any craft so as to become a true master of it. What is happening, for example, in Japan, where a father can no longer apprentice his son at 7 years old to become a carpenter because he has to send him away to school to learn to be an insurance salesman. He can't teach his child, and then comes high school. And then when the kid gets out of high school, he's interested in girls. And it takes him until he's about 22 to be able to settle down to learn carpentry. And it's too late. Too late to attain real mastery. Because a great Japanese carpenter never uses a plan. He doesn't need a drawing. He does it all by eye. And can fit the most complicated joinery together by eye. And it's the same with the arts of weaving textiles, of making superb ceramics, jewelry. Any kind of gorgeous craftsmanship depends on beginning as a child. And so, all right, we can't buy it anymore in this country. There is not, on any kind of commercial basis, great craftsmanship available here. We have to go abroad to get it, to so-called primitive societies. We must be content with plastic simulation. So there is something to be said, you see, for the caste system. I just wanted to present the other side of it. Now, however, in going through this system, there are certain stages, whatever caste you're in. There are 3 stages of life which are called ashrams. Ashram means really an abode. A center for spiritual study, for practicing yoga, will be called an ashram. But an ashram also means an abode in the sense of a stage of life. And the 3 stages are one called brahmacharya. That means the stage of being a student. 2, grihastha, household. The 3rd stage, vanaprastha. That means forest dweller. Isn't that funny? Grihastha, householder, vanaprastha, forest dweller. Because you see, in this order of society, you come into society and you go through one of its acts as a grihastha or householder. But when you arrive at the point in life where you have got a son by birth from yourself or by the marriage of your oldest daughter, a son who will take over your work, you give up being a householder and you become a forest dweller. In other words, you go outside the pale and back to the forest, with the idea of finding out who you really are. While you were in the community, you were playing a role, one of the 4 roles or its subdivisions. And you came on as tinker, tailor, soldier, sailor, rich man, poor man, beggar man, thief. Well, that wasn't the real you. That was one of the masks of the Brahman, the true self behind everything. To find out the Brahman, who you really are, in order to get ready to die, you become vanaprastha. Go back to the jungle, having fulfilled your work to the world. Now, in practice in India, this means that the head of the house often moves to a cottage in the backyard. You know, in the course of time, everything becomes sort of going through the motions. But the original idea was that he became, what do they call it in Sanskrit? Shramana. It's almost the word shaman. A shramana is a person who's gone back to live in the forest. And therefore he is, in regard to society, an upper outcast. There are also lower outcasts. Those are the Aborigines, the people living in India before the Aryan invasion, who later became the untouchables. They are not even Shudra, they are outside caste altogether, like the Indians in the United States. They are true
I can't carry anymore.
untouchables in our caste system. Their plight is so much worse than the Negroes. But they are outcasts. So the same thing happens. But the upper outcast is a man who goes wild. And in Hindu society, you have the right to do that. You are respected if you voluntarily abandon caste. And of course, in doing so, you give up your name and you take another name. Now, taking a new name is taking a new identity. An Indian in society may be Mr. Mukhopadhyaya, and that would be a family name indicating membership in a family. When he becomes a Shramana, however, he will take a name such as Brahmananda, bliss of God. He takes a divine name. And the original idea of a Christian name, when you were baptized, is that you gave up the name Julius, as you might be a Roman, and took on instead the name Matthew, one of the apostles, one of the divine beings of the Christian religion. Or you might take the name of an angel, Michael. Or in Spain or Mexico, even Jesus, Jesus. Jesus Maria
So,
would be a perfectly reasonable name for a man in Spanish culture. But you take on a divine name to indicate a transformation.
this game,
But in this case, when you give up caste, in return
it's very, very
and therefore you take one of the names of that which is no one.
secret.
Only the Brahman. Secret itself. Because it's no one in the sense that it's all one.
Secret.
Therefore in itself no one. So you abandon
Secret.
caste, you abandon name, you give up property.
The fuck was
you
that?
give up both the responsibility and society is allowed to give up responsibility for you.
You have to stop trying to catch onto it and collect it up. It's just water going through a net.
You don't figure that they owe it.
You can't be like, oh, we have to hang on to this particular water that's coming through the net right now and hold it. No.
For people who leave it.
Journey is an incredibly breathtaking space to wander, and it does have little mystifying secret rooms and skyboxes you can sneak into. But this actual game type is what is breathtaking, even in differing aesthetics. Maybe perhaps even more so than something that Stanley Parable was showing us.
They would, I think, be a little uptight about hippies who would abandon society before having fulfilled a responsibility in it. But in a sense, every Shramana is a sort of elderly hippie.
But it's weird when you start thinking about trying to not try.
Our hippies have a different
How
tone.
do you not collect the little liquid coming through the net? Because I'm trying to say this sentence that goes with this moment. And study.
That it is
The sentence that's being said is this one. I'll study it later.
a rat race.
Studying it has value, as saying it.
They might even prefer a caste-like society. This kind.
And if not fully studied, then in a way that's a bit of a hang. You have to study it to not be hung up,
As a vocation.
to allow it to keep flowing through the net. How do we do that? Not grasp it, not hold on to it, let it go, so it's not dragging us.
The word Dharma has many meanings. Dharma.
How I'm going to do that is study each moment, each particle, study the architecture. That's the mystical thing conveyed in the communication of rules. This lecture is telling us that the communication is vibration. The symbol is kind of useless. It can help us label things, but ultimately it's the visual of the room. It's the feeling of rooms, architecture, and the color of skybox, etc. The feeling of being able to jump, wanting to, and now being able to. That's the communication, the motion. We are go.
You're doing it for another end.
You gotta repeat it. You gotta do the same one again and again and again to understand it. That's how you study it. Because that's how reality is shaped. That's what the net is. The thing through which the motion can pass. The repetitions, the pattern.
And you like people so much that you want to heal them from their diseases. Or for the same reason you might want to be a nurse. Or you might be fascinated with problems of law and so become a lawyer. Or fascinated with religion and so become a minister. Then you've got a vocation. Because you would do that thing, whether it paid you very much or whether it didn't, because that's the one thing you have to do. If you're a painter, you have to paint. If you're a writer, you're one of those crazy people who just has to write. I'm a writer. I have to write. Whether it makes me money or whether it doesn't, I would still have to be a writer. So that's a Svadharma. And every person's vocation in caste is supposed to be your thing, your Svadharma. But we feel in our culture, you see, that we have such a tremendous choice of Svadharma that sometimes it's what the French call embarras de richesse. It's like embarrassment of riches when you're confronted with one of those enormous menus in a restaurant which has so many things on it you can't make up your mind which to pick. Well, now then, you see, as a person passes out of this, he gives up the social order and becomes a nobody. He then, in that sense, he goes back to the forest. He goes back from the organization, the role-playing of the agrarian culture, to the solitude of the hunting culture, to find out who he is alone all by himself. And so he becomes, in that sense, the upper outcast. The man who is respected by those people who are still in caste, because they say, without this kind of person, we should lose our sanity. We should become confused with our roles, unless there's always the hermit in the forest to remind us that man is not his role, that he's something deeper than that. And that the true end of man is to play the game of hide and seek for a while and to get lost in these roles, but then to return back to nature, back to the way of the forest, and in later life, as distinct from infancy, with all that experience behind him, find out again who you really are, so that when death comes, what a funny thing will happen. Death comes and will find no one to kill. For while you are identified with your role, with your name, with your ego, there's someone to kill. But when you're identified with the whole universe, death finds you already annihilated, and there's no one to kill. The problem is, we speak first of all of the unity of life, and then suddenly define the social orders as 1, 2, 3, 4, and the stages of life as 1, 2, 3. Of course. Because the whole thing about the one is that it pretends to be many. See, that's the gimmick. The game of hide and seek is dismemberment, falling apart, losing control, losing unity. Let's disintegrate. And then after you've been dismembered, let's remember and come back to oneself and know who it really was all the time. So the one implies the many, and many imply one. And so it goes in and out. It's a systole and diastole, an in-breathing and out-breathing that goes on and on. Now you see it, now you don't. Can the whole know itself as one? Yes. You suddenly get to the extraordinary state where you see that all the variety in front of you, I look out in this room and it's a great variety. It's a wonderful patchwork of all sorts of different people and colors and things. But you get to the point where you see that that variety means one. Things, the more different everything is, the more it proclaims its basic unity with everything else. It just shouts it. In other words, when I see a bright patch of orange next to a bright patch of blue, the brighter that orange, the more it manifests the unity underlying everything. Now that sounds paradoxical, but that's the way I feel it. If all of you wore khaki, olive drab or something, I would feel uniformity rather than unity. I would say, well, that's a drag. Everybody trying to look the same. That's fake unity. It would feel like a plastic champagne glass. Horrible. It warms the champagne instead of that cold crystal. See? And say, that's fake unity. Away with it. But when everybody comes on himself, in a natural way, then I see true unity through the variety.